Rain or shine, hail or snow, he went out and practiced. There was no coaching. That was his world, just going all the time. But he was a quiet person. He wasn't very talkative. He was born in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. I named him after his dad, Harry. And his second name is Winston.
There's Jerome on top. Oh, very close. Men are in the block. There's Harry Jerome right here at the wire end. Of the men's 100-meter final. A good start. And here they come, roaring down to the finish line. Harry Jerome of Vancouver out in front. George Short running in second spot. Then he goes from there. Harry Jerome, winner of the men's 100-meter.
How many steps will it take to belong when the strides you make are interpreted wrong? How many steps will it take to overcome a journey that waits that you cannot outrun?
Harry was at North Van Secondary School, and he and Valerie are the only black kids in the school. Harry is basically shy, and Valerie is very shy. So they were a low profile, except for the athletic ability. Then Paul Angelo Wynn shows up, and he's from Toronto, and he's used to being from kind of a black culture, and he was not taking a back seat to anybody. Real cool cat, as well as a very good athlete.
I grew up in a community that had a lot of black people, and Harry didn't grow up in a community that had a lot of black people. And so when we met, my first impressions of him was, this kid thinks he's white. Just the way he combed his hair and the kind of clothes he wore. Being one of two black kids in the school, we kind of gravitated towards each other. He would talk about the pursuit of excellence, and if he didn't think I was training hard enough or putting enough time and energy into something, he'd be on my case. He wanted me to be better than I was performing.
I was looking to recruit athletes, and I saw the North Vancouver High School relay team run. Harry actually wasn't the anchor. He ran the third leg, but it was easy to pick out that he was the guy that gave them the lead. Paul Wynn actually anchored the team. At the time, he did have a high school coach, but he was leaving to go to teach in England. So Harry and Paul, and then Valerie as well, were quite willing to join the Striders. Vancouver District Track Meet had started back about 1911. Two of the greatest records, 1927, Percy Williams set the senior 100 yards record, and in 1928 had the 220 yards. Harry's times looked like he was going to threaten the 100 yards.
The similarity between Harry and Percy was phenomenal. They were both very shy. They both kind of kept to themselves, and they could both run like hell.
People have to realize that the Vancouver District Track Meet was huge. Anywhere from 15,000 to 23,000 people would show up. It was the biggest annual sporting event in Vancouver.
1959 at the Inter-High Track Meet. Harry's running like a speed demon.
Each time out in the eliminations, Harry was getting closer and closer to those two records. So on the final day, Harry slipped coming out of the blocks in the 100-yard dash and just missed the record, running it in 10.1. But in the 220, he ran 21.9 seconds. That then became the focus of Harry's start in track and field.
It was the sort of thing that vaulted him into a position as being exceptional because he was breaking the records of an Olympic champion. And so there was sort of this aura of expectation that maybe this kid is going to do something.
The world wasn't ready for Harry, and Harry wasn't ready for the world. Suddenly, like almost overnight, he was thrust into this position of notoriety in the track world. Canada hadn't had anybody like Harry since Percy Williams.
A couple of days after the high school final, I phoned Percy and said, not sure if you are aware, there's a young man named Harry Jerome who has just broken your 220 record. Percy said, gee, I didn't even know the record still stood. Who's Harry Jerome? I set up a photo opportunity for the province for Percy and Harry to meet. They became very good friends after that.
I met Harry at the 1960 Olympic trials in Saskatoon. I was 16 and he was this giant.
Men are in the blocks, and they're off and running, and it's a good start. And here they come, roaring down to the finish line. Harry Jerome of Vancouver out in front. George Short running in second spot. Lynn Eaves also in there. Harry Jerome, the winner of the men's 100-meter final. Harry, how long have you been running competitively?
It's my third year in track.
And the 100 and 200 meters are your specialty?
Yes.
Harry, this, without a doubt, is the best time. It's the world's record, but you've also come pretty close in previous occasions, haven't you?
Yes, 3 times.
He broke the world record that night. I saw it. I sat beside Hal Brown, who was the Canadian Olympic coach, and we were sitting very close to the finish line. Hal clicked his watch when Harry crossed, and it recorded 9.9. And because they couldn't believe that a Canadian could have run that fast, they rounded it to 10-point flat and gave him a tie for the world record, not the world record entirely on his own.
Well, I can't say how it trickled through Canada, but I can tell you that in BC, everyone involved in track and field was just ecstatic for one of our athletes to equal a world record. Funny thing about that is Armin Harry came out in media in Germany and said, I don't believe that Harry Jerome ran that fast because I'm so much faster. I think those Canadian officials were cheating when they gave him the 10 seconds. And it was perhaps a psych job by Armin Harry because, as you know, track and field is a huge psych game.
Who is this guy from Canada that has just tied his record? People knew of Armin Harry. They didn't know Harry Jerome worldwide.
We were so proud of him. He was our boy. Of course, you put insane expectations on a 19-year-old kid, and we probably hyped it too much and gave our readers the impression that he was going to win a medal.
The media jumped on the bandwagon, as it were, and there were headlines for Jerome, solid bet for a gold medal in Rome, Jerome, Canada's best bet for a gold medal. What it did was it created excitement in Canada after that, because now we're going on to the Rome Olympics.
In Rome, of course, it was very, very hot. They wanted pictures of him here and there and all sorts of other things. I think it was a great distraction. I couldn't afford to go. I was still a student, so he was pretty well, on his own.
Because of the fact that the media, particularly the Canadian media, where track and field wasn't the #1 sport by any means, they were thrown into covering that without a background or knowledge of how to deal with it. And so I think expectations beyond reality were put on him. I mean, here he was competing against a world of experienced athletes. Even though he'd run fast once, he was carrying the weight of the country.
Now comes the semifinal for the men's 100.
The day of the semifinal heat, Harry was late getting to the track, so he took a taxi cab. Traffic leading to the stadium was just tremendous. So fearing he'd be late for his heat, Harry jumped out of the cab and ran to the stadium.
Harry Jerome explodes out of his box. Harry Jerome is going down. The world record holder is going down.
I'm sure that without being able to warm up properly, obviously had an impact on the running of that race. When he came back to Vancouver, I interviewed him, and he said, "Brian, I could have finished the race, but I would have had to crawl on my hands and knees to get to the finish line."
Now, Harry was running super times. He'd be running in track meets and he'd be beating the cream of the world in terms of the 100 meters. So he was expected to win a gold medal. And so, of course, everybody got their hopes hung up on this gold medal. And they talked about it like it was a certainty. In Harry's mind, it was a certainty too. We had this philosophy that said, if you're not out here to win, you might as well stay home. That's the whole point. Why show up if you don't want to win? So that was his attitude too. I'm here to win. He was expecting to win a gold medal. And, he was going to do everything in his physical power to make sure that he did.
An injury at that point was interpreted by the press and by Canadians that here was a kid who couldn't handle the pressure, when in reality his body gave up. He had a real injury. The media put it on his shoulders whether he wanted it or not.
Andy O'Brien, the Toronto Star reporter, who asked Harry and his sister Valerie, who was on the same team in Rome, she was the Canadian women's sprint champion. Andy O'Brien wanted them to go up onto a hill in Rome, have a picture taken of the two of them overlooking the city. Well, it was something like 44 degrees out that day at noon, and Harry said, "I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt my training. I won't do it. I'll do it after, but I won't do it now before my race." O'Brien went back and wrote a devastating column about this aloof Canadian kid that wouldn't cooperate with the media.
Sure, race was part of it. And of course, for a 19-year-old kid, he was never used to that. He was a hero in his hometown, and when some of the sports writers in Toronto sort of put him down and didn't treat him with the respect that he thought he should have, he fought back. He made his enemies that way. And of course, in the newspaper business, we loved that. We loved to report that.
There were other black athletes, but right then, here in Vancouver, there weren't very many, and there were not that many black sprinters at that very moment in Canada.
It would never have happened in an American camp, because you would never get that close to their athletes without going through a whole series of people. But the Canadian people seem to be a little more, oh yeah, no, go ahead, he's over there, go talk to him. You know, like, meanwhile, the guy's got one of the biggest races in his life.
The Canadian media are going nuts. They're saying Jerome, the spoiled kid, Jerome, the quitter. That's really where he started to get that reputation of being a bad boy with the media.
Here they were very cruel. They were not only lambasting me, you know, for my performance on the track, but also hitting at me personally. As far as the press was concerned, generally, they sort of misunderstood me. I mean, I started my track career in 1959, and I made the Pan American Games, and I never even heard of the Pan American Games. 60, I suddenly was in the Olympic Games, and I was just out of high school. So I was scared and somewhat reluctant to communicate with them, and they probably thought I was a cocky little kid, and maybe I was.
Finally, Mr. Jerome, how do you feel Harry would have made out had he not pulled the leg muscle?
Well, I feel as though that he would have been 1 or 2. As the record holder won the event, I feel as though that Harry would have either ran it or ran a good second.
My husband worked on the train. His job was a sleeping and dining car porter. He never said much. He was facing his own problems there, so he didn't bring it home, you know.
He got suspended because they're not supposed to talk back. He's from the old school. And I relate that to the older black people that I knew as a kid growing up. They tell you, you don't take any guff from anybody. You stand up for yourself. If you act like a doormat, people will treat you like a doormat. And so that's why he reacted the way he did.
My husband, he was transferred here. He was a senior person, so he would have a choice. He chose Vancouver on a different run to beautiful Kelowna, very beautiful. Manitoba was nice to us. That's where my life was. My husband, you know, he figured it'd be a better life, a better working conditions. The train wouldn't be going so much. So he had a rights to be here. But Vancouver's a nice place, but North Vancouver, they didn't want us there. Especially when you get ready to buy a home for your family. It's a no, no.
You have 2 children. Are you going to keep them out?
I couldn't say that right now.
In North End, where he grew up, he knew what happened to his family, the petition to have them move out of the neighborhood because they weren't the right kind of people.
It's a thing that stays like your skin. It stays with you. This goes back to colonial business. They have the land, they got Canada. There's certain places they want to put people. That's the way I see it. You look into colonialism, you'll get your eyes opened. It still goes on today. But they don't want to talk about it in Canada. But the United States will definitely talk about it. But not Canada. It's all a hush, hush.
I see only one face. That is the face of the future.
In the late 50s, the civil rights movement was going crazy in the United States, and there was a lot of talk about discrimination. The spill-off we got here was an interesting one. People would express sympathy and they would say, isn't that terrible? And meanwhile, they're practicing the same thing, but for some reason, because it's across the border, it's different. And then you try to draw that out to people. It was, you know, you were overly sensitive. Jackie Robinson, people would call him nigger and he just wouldn't react. He'd show them with his bat. I hadn't quite evolved to that level of humanity myself, so I reacted. Harry had more of the Jackie Robinson quality than I had.
The climate here does require a lot of perseverance and commitment. If you believe in what you're doing, after a while, you say, well, you know what? If I quit, they win. And they can't win. We're not gonna let them win. That's what it boils down to. And you know you have it in you to show them. And in the end, that attitude always wins.
He was just out of high school. He had the offer from Oregon, from Bill Bowerman.
I accompanied Harry down to the University of Oregon when Bowerman was recruiting. They were wooing him. I tried to suck Bowerman into taking me as an athlete, but he nicely referred me to Oregon State. They were prepared to give me a half a scholarship. It was thousands of dollars where I could go to UBC for $3.
There is no scholarships in Canada at that time. There was, we didn't know about them. He looked forward to, you know, getting a better education. It was a big change. We missed him in our home, you know. He was always there.
Eugene, Oregon is really a unique place. And Bowerman has built tracking to be a big sport in that city. People there just treat athletes like, you know, they're stars, like Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays or like the Paul Hornings or Joe Namath. I mean, you feel wanted.
There was a Canadian tradition at the University of Oregon, and it was a tremendously good choice for me because it turned out that Bill Bowerman became my mentor, sort of one of the most important people in my life. I think Bowerman's basic attitude was more interested in the person than in the result of the sport.
Harry received a letter from Bill Bowerman and invited 28 of his special athletes that he had coached to be part of this company that he was going to set up to make shoes. He wanted them all to participate to the extent of $1,000. Harry came to me and said, what do you think? Why don't we put a little company together and you put $500 and I'll put down $500. I said, Harry, I think it's terrific, but he's 65 years old. He's still working in a kitchen on his wife's waffle iron trying to make new soles of shoes. I said, no, Harry, I don't want to do it. Well, of the 28, only one person didn't send him the $1,000.
And I wanted to so badly.
27 replies, and one was by Phil Knight, who offered $10,000 instead of $1,000.
That ultimately led to the development of the Nike Shoe Company. And of course, the Nike story evolved from a local event to becoming a world giant in sporting goods.
Well, all the 27 became millionaires many times over. It's a terrible story. So if I ever give you any advice on business, don't listen to it.
It was funny. I begged him to buy just $500, please. No, I don't think so. No.
Somewhere in my life, I realized I had to make a choice.
I moved from Edmonton down to Oregon. I applied to do a master's degree in health sciences, and interestingly had a friend from Edmonton who had been down there the year prior and had actually roomed in the same residence as Harry. It was September the 30th, and he said, I was just talking to Harry, he's over in the library, do you want to come and meet him? It was exciting to meet someone who had run faster than anyone else in the world up until that time. I mean, that's an amazing feat. Harry had a real impact on me the moment I met him. He was a beautiful human being to look at. He was extremely fit. He was clean looking. He was very alive. At the same time, that arrogance that could come out of him quite frequently in other situations wasn't there. He was just a very nice human being, a bit shy and so forth. But I just had this feeling it. It just felt right to meet him. It was Harry's 21st birthday, and we went for coffee after, and then shortly after that started seeing each other.
If you see something and you want it, you had better get it. If you see something and you
I was aware then of the issues that would arise. It was difficult as a white girl to date a black man. There were laws against even marriage at that time.
you get it, that 4, 5, 6, you know what to do with it. So if you
What we tried to do on our dates was to stay very public in terms of always never being alone anywhere, so rumors would start. The people that knew us, I'm sure they probably had some concerns, but there was nothing negative. But there was a lot of negativity in some parts of the community, and particularly at the athletic department. They made my life very miserable. At the time, I was teaching at the Women's Physical Education Building. When the athletic department became concerned that I was dating Harry, they sent a couple of the athletes that I knew to convince me that was the wrong thing to do. I should just go to the house parties like other white girls would do and not go out in public. I said, I don't go to house parties. I would notice that my car, which would be parked in the athletic parking lot, would be full of garbage when I came back, or it would be towed away. And then finally, when that didn't stop us, the athletic department spoke to the physical education department, and I was removed from my teaching duties. I went into the United States knowing full well about their feelings towards black people, especially black people and white people together. This is what happened to us, given the tenor of the time. But not everybody was that way. A lot of the kids who were asked to come and talk to us said, you know, we don't feel this way. One man who, every time Harry won a race, would give him a free haircut. It was more an older generation, again, who hadn't become a little bit more accepting, who still felt people should be in those places and these places, and there the twain should meet, that we ran into a problem.
He was consistently in the media tying world or breaking world records.
Modesto Relays, 1962, he beat Hayes in the final. It's a photo finish, of course. Most of them were.
Harry and Bob Hayes were the current world record holders at that time. So it was sort of back and forth between the two of them in the 100 and in the 200.
The rivalry between Harry Jerome and Bob Hayes was an interesting rivalry because in some ways they were kind of good friends. They used to get along well off the track, but they competed fiercely on the track. Hayes was a much bigger man, and he had an awkward running style, whereas Harry was very fluid, smooth as silk. In those days, the NCAA was the third most competitive meet in the world.
Three greatest sprinters in the world at that time were there. There was Harry, there was Bob Hayes, and there was Edwin Roberts from Trinidad Tobago. They were all very good friends. One night prior to the competition actually starting, Harry invited Bob Hayes and Edwin Roberts to his apartment for a social evening, and I was invited to go along.
They came over and I made supper and we played cards, and Edwin Roberts cheats like crazy, and they were getting almost into blows and so on.
This game got very, very heated. I mean, to the point where it was a shouting match, some shoving, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm sitting here with the sports scoop of the year. The three fastest men in the world kill each other prior to the NCAA finals.
What shall I do to put myself by your side? What shall I say to put myself by your side? What shall I go to put myself
We got married in '62, June 30th, actually. We didn't have a lot of money, so it wasn't like we could have a big wedding. We announced it at the track meet the following day. And it made headlines around the world. We lived in this renovated garage and just off the campus. For the few years, it was not too stable. I was just looking through some of the old albums and I saw the pictures from the wedding. And I had to phone you because when Harry and I decided sort of at the last minute there to get married that weekend, we had nobody. We needed the best man. And I thought, who can I ask? You know, who still knows me, who's still my friend? And it was you.
For a man who was so successful at that time and who had such a presence on the world stage, he was exceedingly courteous and ordinary, and he never struck you as trying to be anything other than what he was, a young person who was working hard as an athlete.
You had to find us a church, though. It was the church that was down by your home, yeah. And you had talked to the minister and set everything up for us there, which was really nice, yeah. And of course, Harry, you know, coming in had, the only person he really knew here was me. So it was,
that's right.
That was really good that, you know, that you had done that for us. I think he always appreciated that.
People like Harry Jerome, the distance runner Bruce Kidd, were terrific athletes, world-class athletes. But Canada had very, very few of them. And unbelievably difficult expectations were placed on them. One should be lauded for getting there. But then if you don't win the race, quote, you're a bum.
The 1962 British Empire and Commonwealth Games were held in Perth, Australia. It was an adventure. We assembled in Vancouver, cold and rainy. We flew to Hawaii, spent a day there acclimatizing. Then we went to Brisbane. In those days, you flew by turboprop, so it was a very slow flight.
He'd had a successful NCAA season that year, and he was working really hard to prepare for the games.
There was no doubt in my mind he was in just phenomenal shape. His workouts were good, he had a good attitude, he was looking forward to doing well.
It was so hot that you take a shower and you wouldn't dry yourself with a towel. You just let it evaporate to cool yourself off.
He started to have high fevers. And he kept training, he kept doing everything, but this fever didn't seem to want to go away.
He did get a cold that I didn't know about, and he had to make that difficult decision. But the pressure to run is just enormous. Like, you can imagine what would happen if he decided, oh, I've got a cold, I'm not going to run. You know, that press would just crucify him. Harry was running very well in Perth. The starts were good, and he would just coast through the end.
There they go. A very good start.
In the final, he started out, but he had no power. Something was wrong, and he kept going, but it was more like a jog to the finish line, and of course, he was dead last.
I came out to the track after the 100, and to my subsequent embarrassment, Harry was walking back, and I just thought he won. So I yelled, "Way to go, Harry." I just assumed that he'd won. It was well over 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade when I ran at 6 o'clock that night. It was only after my race that I realized that he was injured in the race, and he didn't even finish. I just took it for granted that he'd won it.
Again, it would have been nice if he had some help from team management. I don't fault Fred Foote. He had his own athletes there. When Harry actually got hurt, Fred Foote wasn't even in the stadium.
No doctors, no physios, no anybody. And he was left to deal with this alone. And the coaches, well, they weren't his own coaches, so they may have hardly talked to him.
If you're expected to win a race and you come in last and you don't know why, the leg didn't hurt. He didn't feel any pain. So he just felt this lack of power. They got into a media scrum, and Mike Agostini, I don't know what he was trying to prove, I guess, to get something sensational for his paper. And he began to goad Harry into saying controversial stuff. Harry ended up blurting out, you know, I just quit. It's just because he didn't know at that point why he didn't have any power in that leg.
The papers went nuts. Crank phone calls coming into the house, waking me up from my sleep. So it was really bad, and this went on for a couple of days. In the meantime, they're talking about the injury, and of course, oh yeah, he's pulled up injured again. They're all psychological. You know, he was injured in Rome, now he's injured in Perth.
They were mainly Eastern press, and they didn't know him as well as those of us in Vancouver did. And when he had more injuries than most world-class sprinters have, that's where the rumors got that he couldn't handle it mentally, that he would choke. And of course, that just enraged him, as it would anybody of that stature.
One more time, Canadian reporters doubted that he was injured. But I can tell you, I sat beside him and he said, "Feel my leg." I put my hand down his quad, and there was a hole in it as big as my fist. I've never forgotten that.
It's incomprehensible that you would have that kind of injury, like you have a muscle tear, but rarely would you sever it completely. Now, whether or not the cold affected the injury, Bill Barman definitely thinks it did. I'm not sure. Certainly if he had had a fever, he shouldn't have competed. He had to have an operation right away. Rather than have it in Australia, he wanted to come home.
In an Australian newspaper, a fellow met us at the airport, and he was quite upset that I was leaving. He thought I was chickening out of the race, the 220-yard race. And this story, I guess, reached Canada before I reached home, and again, there was some bad feelings regarding my leaving the team.
Brian Pound from the Vancouver province, who was a friend of Harry's, phoned me and said, there's going to be a zoo at the airport. He said, what about you and I drive to Seattle? Because the plane was coming into Seattle and then into Vancouver. Why don't you do that? And we'll meet him and we'll bring him home.
When Harry came to Vancouver from Perth, the leg looked just like it was incredible. Normally, the muscle of the thigh would go right to the knee and it would bulge out a bit. I know people haven't seen it, but me seeing it, I thought it was just like incredible.
Harry, was this injury similar to the one you suffered in Rome, or was it nothing like it?
Well, it's entirely different. The other one in Rome was right in the hamstring in the back of the leg, and this one's in the front of the leg.
I guess you were fairly disappointed, not after your particularly good times in the heats, not to be able to do better in that final.
Well, I would have liked to have done much better, yes.
Dr. Gillespie, who's a big orthopedic surgeon in Vancouver, phoned to say that they were expecting Harry to come, and Harry didn't want to go. He didn't want to go. Dr. Gillespie phoned me again. I said, I can't get him to go. He doesn't want to go. He said, well, you've got to get him here. We've got to get the surgery done. If we don't do it now, he'll be crippled for life.
No one's ever done one of these operations before. So he could be fine, or he could maybe never be able to walk without a cane.
The quadriceps muscle is this large muscle in the front of the thigh. This exploded, if you will, with the tension that he gave it. Because there'd never been a case who you could ever say, oh, well, I've had 10 patients like that, so they all got better, so don't worry. It was quite the reverse. We've never had anybody like this. We've never had a world record holder whose finely tuned body was necessary to create that sort of velocity.
The scar went from his knee way up his thigh, like at least 12 inches, because he had to cut that far up to get the muscle and stretch it back down so he could attach it to the tendon near the knee. The difficulty would have been that if you overlapped when you sewed the muscle back on, then it would be too tight and you'd have a bit of a limp. And if it was too far apart, then you'd have a slackness and you'd also have a limp.
Speculation was he was through. He would never run again. No one could ever come back from that sort of injury.
It was very difficult times. He spent Christmas in the hospital. That was a terrible, terrible injury, and not just like a little tear someplace. This was everything gone.
I didn't get the sense that he was despondent, frustrated on occasion, and it presented some problems financially, for sure.
I started at Britannia School and lost my job because once you were 3 months pregnant, you couldn't teach anymore. So that was wonderful. The city of North Vancouver were wonderful to us. They paid our rent, they bought our food, they paid our utilities for us until we could get back on our feet. I am forever grateful to those people. Without that, I don't know what we would have done.
everything happened at once. But he seemed to get over it. It took a long time, though. He endured a lot, and poor Wendy, she endured a lot, too. Yeah, I think he was heartbroken when things happened. And Wendy was heartbroken, too. But as Wendy said, there'll be no athletes in our family. I could see her point. I would agree with her. There's too much. It's too much.
People have been misled.
I was 4 years old when they first started putting me in track meets, and I would come in 4th and 3rd or 2nd. I mean, but that's not good enough when you're Harry Jerome's daughter.
She was very athletic. She could have been a very, very good track and field athlete. She did set a hurdle record that lasted for many, 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 many years. So she had all kinds of ability.
Piece of bread, but I ain't never.
You know, it'd be like, oh, this is Harry Jerome's daughter, so she'll be on the track team, and of course she'll win. You're supposed to always be as good as he was. I mean, I think I've always realized it, so, but he was always just my father first.
I can remember at a big track meet, Debbie was walking down the track, and I saw Harry in every movement she made, the way she strode, the angle of her head, the position of her arms. It was Harry.
My mom was always encouraging. She thought I would really excel well in track. My father, on the other hand, his favorite words to me would, "Why are you running? It will do nothing for you." And then he would get me a tennis racket. And I'd tell him, "Oh, Dad, I won this meet. Oh, running will do nothing for you." And he would get me a set of cross-country skis. I think in his eyes, he didn't want probably the bad, negative stuff that had happened to him to happen to me, because I didn't understand the negative publicity he went through, because I was kind of always shielded from that. But I can understand now why he would.
When the cast came off, that leg was about the size of Harry's arm, and it didn't look all that good.
A little leg like that, one leg was so small compared to the other one, and this humongous scar. God, the scar had to be 17, 18 inches long. It was a massive thing.
He got into another bit of controversy when they were looking to get some of his paraphernalia for the BC Sports Hall of Fame. And he said he's not going to give it to them. So I said, "Harry, well, why not?" He said, "Well, the Sports Hall of Fame is for people who have finished running." He says, "I'm not finished." And I thought, wow, what do you mean? He said, "Well, I'm going to run again." And I said, "Well, if that's what you want, let's work on it." And kind of an emotional time.
Harry was a very determined individual. While everybody else was saying, "You'll never run again, you probably never ever walk properly again," Harry dismissed all that and said, "I will run again, and I will walk properly." So slowly the rehabilitation started.
He stayed in Vancouver, and we worked out a weight training regimen, and we had a massage therapist who worked on his leg. Gillespie was around to check, and Harry and Hector became really close friends, as did I.
John nurtured Harry, he brought him along, he strengthened Harry, and he taught Harry how to weight train.
Minicello, with his revolutionary thinking, decided we needed to do weight training. And that was something that wasn't a program for track athletes at that time.
I introduced the idea of the snatch and the clean and jerk and using heavy weights. It would be three days a week on running and 2 weight training.
His rule of thumb was that you should never lift anything heavier than 1/3 your body weight. The regimen that Minicello put people through had a lot to do with why people improved and why Harry improved.
As far as I was concerned, if he was prepared to do the work, I was prepared to help him get the work done. He was indomitable in terms of his spirit, that he was determined that he was going to get back.
The races that you won, you remember, but you don't dwell on them. The races that you lost, you spend your lifetime rethinking. You'd like to think that you could run through injury. You'd like to think that you were stronger than that, so you have your own doubt.
That leg never, ever got as big as the other one, but he worked at that remarkably and didn't go back to Oregon until the leg was actually in pretty good shape.
He finally ran in a race. I think he may have finished third or fourth in that race. And then he ran a second race. He ran a little better. Then came an indoor collegiate meet at Portland.
Running 60 yards indoors was not the best way to go because it's all start and all power.
He ran 6.0, equal the world record. And I remember standing off to the side with his coach, Bill Bowerman. Bill turned to me and said, "Brian, that's the greatest comeback in track and field history."
People say, oh, you know, he severed his muscle, they patched it up, he ran a world record later. It's just incredible achievement.
Here is a man who, with that 6.0, did something that no other runner in history had ever done. He held the 100 meters, the 100 yards, the 6.0 indoors, and he was also on the University of Oregon relay team that set the world record. He also became the first man in history to hold both the world records for the 100 yards and 100 meters at the same time.
He was always at odds in a playful way with the officialdom of track and field. In most sports, the officialdom of the sport are very serious people, dedicated people. In track and field, I think they're even more so.
He wore his Oregon t-shirt backwards. It obviously spelled a word that was very similar to Negro. He had some support from a couple of the other team members on the Oregon track team. And it caused a bit of a stir and a lot of conversation, which is probably what it was intended to do in the first place.
There's always this movement to humble great black athletes for one reason or another. They always try to belittle them. I think there has been a progress. I remember a time when black athletes couldn't be linebackers in the NFL. They weren't smart enough. They weren't smart enough to be quarterbacks. And guess what happens? You let them in and they lead the league. They don't like to see people like Harry succeed. It explodes the myth. It's not consistent with the myth of worthlessness and uselessness.
Harry's preparation for the '64 Olympics in Tokyo was very much like for the Perth Games. He was actually in very good shape. We knew that the main opposition was going to be Hayes.
He and Bob Hayes were the first two really muscled 100-yard men in the world. They were powerful guys.
Harry at a track meet, he's focused, that's it, no socializing. He just doesn't want to do anything, he just want to focus.
I've never been so nervous in all my life before a race. You practically hyperventilate. It's one of the characteristics that he had, but he always kept it to himself.
There are times when the pressure becomes overpowering and you just freeze up. And the stress theorists will tell you that you have to optimize your stress. If you have too much, it's destructive. If you have none, you're flat.
I don't think we ordinary guys are understand what that must be like. To live in a place where you have to do the best in the world is another place altogether. And I believe that even many, many, many of the Olympic athletes never get to that place.
Hayes just exploded. Perhaps the most unorthodox running style of any world-class sprinter I certainly have ever seen. He almost won the silver. He got nipped by Figueroa of Cuba.
I don't know where the little Cuban came from, but it should have been Hayes and Jerome or the other way around.
I think he was disappointed. He was so close for the silver on that photo with Figueroa. The bronze was an amazing comeback. It took him a long time to determine who'd won. It was that close.
He also got fourth in the 200. A bronze and a fourth in the Olympics is pretty good. Not too many people do that. So it was actually a very good Olympics for Harry.
It truly is a miracle, and it shows real substance to his personality and his sense of perseverance.
A lot of his critics said, hey, this guy's for real. Maybe we were wrong. He persevered and became a remarkable story in the history of Canadian athletics and world athletics in terms of what he did accomplish after all that.
It's hard in some ways being married to an elite athlete. You have all kinds of wonderful experiences. You meet wonderful people. Those are the positives, and you should enjoy every single second of it. A lot of people will never have those opportunities. At the same time, there's also a downside. Your life isn't really your own, because everything you do, people know who you are, and they're going to make comments on it. I think one of the other things that's really difficult is that there's a lot of availability of females for Harry. Race was never the issue. It was the same things that go wrong in any other marriage with any other persons. And so we separated, and then we divorced.
My mom worked all the time, so then I would spend a lot of my summers here in Edmonton, or I would visit my father in Ottawa or Vancouver, depending where he was living. I think I had more air miles than any other kid by the time I was 6, and most people do in their whole lifetime. My father lived with Paul Wynn a lot, and when I used to go out and visit, I would never stay with my father, never. I would stay with the Dr. Al Rader, his home, with his wife.
He tended to dump, and I'll use that expression, his daughter, Debbie, on the Al Rader's family all the time. Parenting skills, you know, weren't top drawer with Harry. He just felt uncomfortable with it.
I know that it hurt her that she could not stay with him. She doesn't voice it that way, but I know it did. In some ways, he was a wonderful father. He'd change the diapers, and he'd, get up for our night feedings. And when she was a small baby, he was wonderful. I think when the children get a little older and they're a bit more demanding and judgmental, it was harder on him. I think he was terribly afraid of being hurt, being turned away, of being judged negatively. And I think children can be very unkind, yes, even to adults.
After Harry left university, of course, he had to make a living, and so he's in Vancouver, and he got a job as a PE teacher, and he taught for a while at Templeton Secondary School in East Vancouver. After 64 and getting ready for 66, he was working full-time and still having to train. The difficulty, I think, was you didn't have the weekly competition like you did when you were at university.
Well, I've always had a goal to run 9.1 for the 100 yards, and I'm glad that I finally did it.
Before the finals was a fellow by the name of Lennox Miller. And Harry casually put in his blocks 3 feet behind Miller's blocks. And a split second before Miller burst out of his block, Harry burst out of his block and went screaming by Miller. There's a mind game going on. He's just destroyed this young kid.
The one competitor they feared most was Tom Robinson from the Bahamas. Robinson and Jerome hit the line together. I remember standing off to the side with Harry, and his sister Valerie was there as well. Every so often, the announcer would make an announcement.
The unofficial time for the final was 9.5 seconds. The official result we'll have to wait on for a few minutes.
Finally, after about 45 minutes, they announced Harry had won. He finally got that gold medal. Everything that had gone on before, it was all just pushed aside in that one glorious moment.
The only Olympics that I got to with Harry was in '68 in Mexico. And at that point, even though some people think, you know, comparing times, that he was in great shape, but actually he wasn't. He was in good enough shape, but we didn't have a good summer.
Our Canadian hope, Harry Jerome, running out of lane 7.
In the quarters, he just barely scraped in. Then in the semis, he just, as usual, got really determined. And I thought to make the final was remarkable.
There's the gun, there's the start. Watch lanes 1 and 3, green and high.
Most of the other athletes of his vintage quit after the Olympics, after you get a medal, especially sprinters. Nowadays, we have sprinters that are competing again at age 30, 31. That was literally unheard of in the 60s.
Harry Jerome manages to keep from being last. He placed 7th. Hines' official winning.
Remarkable career, really, in terms as far as sprinters go. Nowadays, if they even make 2 Olympics, it's a big deal. Harry went to 3 as a sprinter.
I was having dinner with John Carlos when he got the news he was out of the village and had to go back. There was a lot of pressure on different athletes from different teams to not say anything. In this case, Harry had been advised not to say anything, or whether he chose to, I don't know. And the American athletes, they were told. They were told clearly.
There seemed to be various degrees of militancy among that group of Negro athletes on the American team. Are some of the Negro athletes against what Carlos and Smith have done?
Well, I'd say some of them are, definitely. I mean, some of them definitely came here to compete and try to pick up some medals. Others are sort of walking the middle of the road, and there's some others that definitely feel like Tommy and Carlos, and they really don't know what to do.
I was a supporter of the Olympic Project for Human Rights in 1967 and 1968. In track and field, men like Tommy Smith openly debated whether they should go to the Olympics and risk having their performances read as everything is fine, or boycott to dramatize some of the difficulties at home. Harry and I were interviewed on CBC television. They put us in a situation where I'm defending the politicization of the conditions of black athletes in the United States. He's saying maybe that's going too far. He's not saying that they're not right. And all of a sudden, a realization pops into my head. Harry, I learned a lot of this from you.
I've talked to you, and I've known each other for a long time, and I'm not saying that you're playing a different tune today, but you've told me some pretty terrible stories about the way you and other Negroes have been treated in American universities, and certainly you brought to my attention the fact that that you may be a hero on Saturday, but during the week you're just another Negro who has to be ignored.
These are some problems they have there right now at a lot of campuses, and there's rebellion on a lot of these campuses, and changes are being made. And I know that the coaches at various institutions are quite aware of these problems. They're starting to do something about them.
This is on national CBC television, and our small careers as sports people are being played out in terms of these larger debates about social justice, the civil rights movement, what is truthfulness, and what you can get away with. And Harry is saying there are real limits to protest, like my livelihood and my future. So I've got to be cautious, and don't give me a hard time about that. It's easy for you to say you're not at risk.
Well, the question is, will they do a lot more if they're forced to wrestle with problems like boycotts?
Yes, I mean, this is important. I think they do have to be pushed. On the other hand, you still got to be constructive about it, Bruce. Well, I think it's easy to get up there on the platform and say that you're discriminated against and there's segregation here, but if you don't come up with any constructive ways to overcome this situation, then you got some other problems. And all you do is get people upset and more emotionally involved.
I was a middle-class white young man in the media center of Canada at a time when my athletic feats lend to certain narratives about Canadian nationalism. Harry was a contemporary, but he came from another region, and he was black. Some of these pressures against him were not just points for debate, but points to be really fearful.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Centennial Athletic Program Award Night. We are fortunate to have with us tonight Mr. Harry Jerome, world-renowned athlete, who will give the awards to the young athletes who participated in this program.
Harry had a social conscience, and I think he was nonpartisan, quite honestly. He gravitated to a party that was in power because his perception was they would be capable of making things happen. At one point, I almost had to twist his arm to become involved in supporting causes in the black community. It's not that he didn't have actions against racism, but he just never seemed to take a public stance about it.
He wouldn't be marching on the street with a sign. He didn't like that kind of limelight. One of the things that he picked up on in those days, like you get a department store catalog, none of the models were either Chinese or black or Indo-Canadian, right? None of them. He picked up the phone one day and phoned Chunky Woodward, and he said, what's going on? Why don't you have more people of color in your ads? Your big main store is right off Chinatown. The very next week, the flyer came out with people of color in it.
He's the kind of guy that, wrote the letters, trying to influence things that way. And I think he felt that was a better approach than publicly trying to embarrass somebody or into doing something.
I retired after the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico. Competing for Canada, I think it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed the 3 Olympics, the 2 British Empire Games, the 2 Pan Am, 1 University Ed, and 1 tour. I'll always look back on it. I think maybe I could have done a better job if the system or the program would have been better.
On your mark, set. There goes Harry Jerome. Thank you, Harry.
My future plans, I hope to get together with 6, 7 other athletes and get into the school situation and to motivate, glamorize, and to educate the kids and the administrators a little bit about what track and field is and what amateur sport's all about.
Percy Williams had passed away. I was somewhat saddened by it because in the latter part of his life, really almost lived like a recluse. Harry would phone him and they'd go for lunch the odd time. When Percy passed away, I think it affected Harry a lot more than he really let on.
Harry was seizure prone. He'd be sometimes hospitalized because he would suffer some injury where he'd have to be treated. He came out of hospital to attend the funeral of one of his heroes, Percy Williams.
Harry and I and Paul Wynn and a couple of other people had had lunch. Harry was being met by a friend who was driving him back over to North Vancouver. So we went down and Harry got in the car. I said to him, "Have a good dinner, pal. I'll see you tomorrow." I shut the door and the car drove away and I never saw Harry again.
At that point, he had not been long out of the hospital, having undergone a seizure. I felt that he wasn't himself, and I put my hand on his hand. I said, "Are you okay?" I realized that Harry was, again, having another seizure. I just did a 360, turned around and took him straight to Lionsgate Hospital in North Vancouver. He was taken into emergency care immediately, and I was asked to wait. The doctors came out and told me that Harry had not survived.
I was at a bingo game with my daughter, and she said, "Mother, we gotta leave." They didn't tell me then, but when he got in the car, she told me.
My younger brother phoned me from Toronto, and he said, "I'm sorry, Harry Jerome died." I said, "I just had lunch with him. You know, he's not dead." 42, too young. Too young. He didn't deserve to die that young.
The plane I was on landed in Guam, and I walked into the airport, and there was a headline, "Harry Jerome died."
The official cause of death was asphyxiation, but what had been causing the seizures, I've never been told why.
In Harry's family, there's a history of epilepsy. And when Harry was in his 30s, he started having seizures.
I stayed with him in the Richmond General Hospital while he had a CAT scan done because he was absolutely terrified. And you could see it. He would never say he was.
He was scared, and he was scared because he didn't know what was going on within him, what the sickness was, if there was a sickness, and what was causing it.
We were having one of our rum and cokes on a Saturday afternoon, and he said, "Tell me, where am I when I have one of these things?" He said, I'm not in heaven." He says, "and I'm not on earth, so where am I?"
The only thing I wanted was to spend time with my father before the funeral. My father was to be buried at 3 o'clock that afternoon. They told me my father had been buried already.
I was never happy with how Harry was buried. There was nobody there except the 2 workmen who lowered his casket in the ground and filled it up with earth. There was not a friend, not a family member. There was nobody there. That was on the instructions of his sister Valerie. She said she didn't want his burial to be a media circus.
We didn't get to see his body put in the ground. So we had the memorial service, but not the closure of actually seeing the burial. I think I have had closure. Yes, I would say I have. But I'm not sure my daughter has. Because of the distance between them for most of her life, I'm not sure how I could help her. I think many of the things, such as the Harry Jerome Awards, where she sees her father honored, would help. It's very hard to say. Everyone finds closure in their own way. I'm not sure what would give that to my daughter.
You always have the dream of, oh, when I'm older, my dad and I'll become friends and we'll build the relationship. That never will happen. I never had that chance. Most of my life has been spent after his death, because that's when I started to realize exactly who my father was. The media seems to always want to take the most negative part instead of the good part. I can always remember seeing the articles, quitter, marries white woman. You don't know the story.
In Toronto, the black community was evolving. You had your hardworking people, some doctors, lawyers, civil service. You had your police and your nurses. And then you have the problem gangs and punks on the street. Well, they got a lot more attention, just as Harry did, with negativism. And I thought, well, hey, you know, there are a lot of good things in the black community, and we should project ourselves.
What you see on this stage tonight, there is no leadership in this country that supersedes what you see on this stage. There is no talent in this country that supersedes what you see on this stage tonight. So I want you to help me out. When I say clap, I'd like everybody to clap just one time together, because woo, we are better together. Ready? So when I say clap, everybody, one time together. Ready? Clap! 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 Clap!
I wrote a letter to a group of people, and we had a meeting there and decided to form this Black Business and Professional Association. I believe Hamlin Grange came up with the name Harry Jerome, which sort of immortalized the whole thing.
This year marks the 26th year of the Harry Jerome Track Classic.
That really helps with the pain of everything, knowing that this goes on strong and that people want to win my dad's award and people care enough to continue doing it.
I do believe that the youth emulate people who achieve. Black and white want to emulate Muhammad Ali, and black and white want to emulate Harry Jerome. Harry could do it. Hey, Ali could do it. It's important for white people to see it, because the media is so relentless in pointing out the robbers and the bad guys that it doesn't give them a chance to form their own opinions or give them the examples of good people for them to respect the race.
How many steps will it take to believe after the distance you ran to finally succeed? How many steps will it take to be bold in a place that misunderstands you from 12 years old?
I am the mother of Harry Jerome. Time goes so fast. When they're little, they're yours. When they're grown up,